The first thing Kieran noticed wasn't the weapons, it was the silence. 1,000 throats held back, 1,000 hearts pretending not to beat, in a hall so bright it felt like standing inside a cut gem. The ceiling arched like frozen aurora, sheets of crystal ribbed with soft light that shifted from pearl to violet, as if the palace itself breathed in colors. Every step echoed with the delicate arrogance of a civilization that had never needed to hurry. And at the center of it all stood a woman the nobles had decided not to see. She was tall, not in the way humans boasted about height, but in the way a spear looks tall, straight, deliberate, unbending. Her skin shimmered faintly, as if moonlight had learned how to cling to living flesh. A crest of pale, plated ridges swept back from her temples like a crown nature had sculpted before any jeweler ever dared. Her eyes were dark, deeper than black, rimmed with a thin ring of silver that caught the light whenever she blinked. The nobles lined the dais in a half-circle, layered in robes woven with threads of precious metals. Each wore a collar of sigils, family histories hammered into ornament. Each held themselves with the practiced posture of people who believed the universe came with a hierarchy already stamped into the stars. They were waiting, not for her to speak, for her to break. Behind Kieran, the human delegation stood in stiff formality, Ambassador Rel in his plain diplomatic suit, aides with data slates clutched like shields. Kieran was only here because someone had decided a former field engineer who'd survived 3 border campaigns made a useful security advisor. He'd been told to watch for trouble, but trouble didn't always wear a blade. Sometimes it wore perfume and a lineage. A chime rang from somewhere unseen, gentle as a droplet falling into still water. It was the signal, the moment. The alien woman stepped forward 1 pace and her voice carried across the hall with the calm of someone accustomed to being obeyed. By right of succession, she said, by oath of the covenant rings and by the will of the living council, I return to claim the throne of Lur. A whisper flickered through the crowd, quick, hungry, afraid. The word throne made people do strange things. It made cowards brave and decent men disappear. The nobles did not bow, they did not kneel, they didn't even offer the smallest ceremonial tilt of their crests, the gesture that, on Kieran's quick study of Lur protocol, was the bare minimum of respect granted to a figure of authority. They simply stared. Then, in a voice sharpened like glass, the eldest among them spoke. Lord Cotharin of House Koth, his crest gilded, his robe so heavy with jeweled embroidery it looked like it should have dragged him to the floor. You may call yourself Surith Valori, Cotharin said, each syllable carefully measured, but this court does not recognize you. A murmur spread, and with it the faintest hint of relief, as if many in the hall had been waiting for someone else to commit the first act of treason so they wouldn't have to be first. The woman, Surith, did not flinch. Her shoulders remained level, her chin high. But Kieran saw it anyway, a slight tightening at the corner of her mouth, a flicker of pain that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Cotharin continued, the throne has been absent, the dominion has bled, our borders burn, our trade routes crumble, we have endured under the stewardship of noble regents. Another noble, Lady Veshra of House Mir, lifted a slender hand, her rings chimed softly. And now you arrive, she said sweetly, with humans. The word humans landed like an insult, like dirt under the tongue. Kieran felt Ambassador Rel stiffen beside him. Surith turned her gaze toward the human delegation, not in apology, not in reassurance, simply acknowledgement, as if she'd expected the resentment. My arrival is not your permission, Surith said. It is your duty. Cotharin's crest flared, an involuntary sign of anger. Duty, he echoed, amused. You speak as if you have not been gone for 7 cycles. I was not gone, Surith said, her voice still calm. I was taken. That stirred something, a ripple of surprise. A few nobles glanced at one another, quick calculations behind their eyes. Kieran's gut tightened. Taken, abducted queens didn't vanish without someone benefiting. Cotharin lifted his chin. Regardless, the Dominion cannot be ruled by a sovereign who returns carrying the scent of human worlds. A few chuckles, cold and soft. Surith held their stares one by one as if memorizing each face for later judgment. Then she stepped forward again, closer to the dais, closer to the line of nobles who refused her. By the covenant rings, she said, a sovereign may be challenged, but only by the proper forms. Lady Veshra smiled. Forms, yes, we respect forms. Surith extended her hands, palms up. Then honor them, she said. Offer the recognition due. If you would challenge me, do so after. If you would deny me, do it with the full weight of law. Cotharin's smile widened. "I deny you now," he said, "and I do so with the full weight of this court." Behind him, one noble after another lifted their crests in agreement, not bowing, not kneeling, but flaring their ridges in a synchronized gesture that meant refusal, a wall of rejection. Kieran watched Surith's face, expecting anger, expecting fury. What he saw instead was something far worse: weariness. The kind that comes from fighting too long without anyone holding the line with you. A soft voice behind Kieran muttered, "That's it, they're going to strip her title in public." Another, tighter, "If she loses here, the border war becomes a feeding frenzy." Kieran didn't respond. His mind had slipped into that place it always went in the field, the place where emotion became background noise and everything became angles and threats and timing. He scanned the hall. There were guards, yes, tall and lacquered, holding ceremonial polearms that weren't ceremonial at all. There were drones embedded in the ceiling ribs, their lenses watching. There were nobles with hidden blades in their sleeves. Kieran saw the subtle bulge, the micro shear of fabric. And then there was the dais itself, an elevated platform of crystal-veined stone with the throne behind it half hidden by banners. The throne wasn't a chair, it was a structure, a living interface. A relic older than most bloodlines in this room. It pulsed faintly like a sleeping beast. Kieran had read about it in the pre-briefings. The Lur throne responded to neural signatures, lineage markers, and something called the Witness Oath, an ancient protocol from First Contact days when the Dominion had nearly fractured into warlords before a single act of public recognition stabilized it. The Witness Oath required, if he remembered correctly, someone outside the noble houses. A witness without stake, a witness who would kneel. Kieran's throat went dry. He looked at Ambassador Rel, who was watching with cautious neutrality, the way humans did when they weren't sure whether to defend someone or avoid becoming the target of a room full of powerful aliens. Kieran looked back at Surith. She stood alone, and for a heartbeat the hall felt like a battlefield, not because of the weapons, because of the choice. The noble's refusal had a purpose: isolate her, make her beg, force her to bargain her power away in exchange for ceremonial acceptance. They wanted her to kneel so they could stand. Kieran felt his hand twitch. He wasn't supposed to move. He wasn't supposed to interfere. The mission was diplomacy, neutrality, don't escalate, but there were moments in life where neutrality was just cowardice with a better suit. Surith's gaze swept the hall, and for the first time it landed on Kieran. It wasn't a plea, it wasn't even hope, it was recognition of fact. This is happening, her eyes seemed to say. This is what they do. Kieran inhaled. He stepped forward. Aides behind him murmured, startled, but he didn't stop. He walked past the human line and into the open floor where every eye could see him, where every drone lens adjusted to track him, where the sound of his boots on crystal felt indecently loud. Kotharin blinked, thrown off script. "Human," he said, as if tasting a foreign spice. "This is not your—" Kieran didn't look at him. He walked until he stood a few paces from Surith, close enough to feel the faint heat radiating from her skin, close enough to see the fine scars at her jawline, clean, precise, like surgical marks. She watched him, expression unreadable. Kieran lowered his gaze, not in submission but in focus. Then he dropped to one knee. The motion cut through the hall like a blade. A collective gasp rose, sharp and involuntary. Kieran placed his fist against his chest, the old human gesture from military oath ceremonies. He made it slow, deliberate, unmistakable. "I bear witness," he said, his voice carrying more than he expected. "Surith Valori is sovereign by right and by oath." For a second, nothing happened. Then the throne behind the dais responded. A low hum pulsed through the crystal floor, vibrating up Kieran's knee and into his bones. Lights flared along the hall's ribs. The banners behind the throne lifted as if caught by wind from nowhere. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and cold metal. The throne awakened. Lines of pale light crawled across its surface, forming patterns like veins. A tone rang out deep and resonant, and the hall itself seemed to listen. Some of the nobles stumbled back. Surith's breath caught just a fraction. Then the throne spoke, not with words, with law. A projection unfolded in the air above the dais. A lattice of symbols that rippled and rearranged until it formed a single phrase in the Dominion's formal glyphs. Witness oath accepted. Kotharin's face drained of color. Lady Veshra's smile faltered. Surith turned slowly toward the dais, and the throne's light reached for her like a tide recognizing its shoreline. Kieran stayed kneeling, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack his ribs. He'd gambled on a ritual he'd only half understood. And it had worked, but he felt suddenly the weight of what he'd done. He'd made a statement to an entire empire, not just she is queen, but I am with her. That was how alliances started, and how wars did too. Surith stepped forward 1-2 paces and the light from the throne touched her hands. She didn't flinch. Her fingers curled slightly as if grasping something invisible. The projection shifted. Sovereign signature confirmed. A new line appeared beneath it. Vassal Prime recognized. Kieran's blood went cold. Vassal Prime, he lifted his head alarmed just in time to see Kotharin's eyes widen with sudden predatory understanding. Oh, Kotharin whispered, barely audible. It binds him. Lady Veshra's voice sharpened. You foolish creature, you have placed yourself inside our law. Kieran swallowed. Surith looked down at him, and for the first time her composure cracked, not into weakness but into something like fierce, restrained satisfaction. You knew, she said quietly for his ears alone. I read, Kieran managed. Some enough. She leaned closer, her voice a blade hidden in velvet. Then you know what they will do next. Kieran's mind raced. Vassal Prime, an outsider recognized as the Queen's first pledged witness, not just a supporter but a legal anchor, a human now woven into Dominion protocol. If the nobles challenged her, they could challenge him. If they struck at her, they had reason to strike at him too. Kieran exhaled through his nose. Well, he muttered, because sometimes sarcasm was the only way his nerves didn't shatter. That's inconvenient. Surith's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then she straightened, turned to the nobles, and her voice rose again, clear and unshakable. The throne has spoken, she said. You denied me recognition. The throne has granted it regardless. The Dominion remembers its own laws even when its houses pretend to forget. Kotharin recovered quickly, too quickly. He stepped forward, crest flaring in indignation. This is manipulation, he snapped. A human kneels and you claim it as legitimacy. You bring foreign hands into our sacred right. Foreign, Surith cut in, eyes hardening. Your trade ships dock at human stations. Your regents beg human fleets to patrol your routes. Your sons study human engines to keep your ships flying. But when a human honors our law more than you do, you call him foreign. The crowd murmured again, but the tone had shifted, not relief now. Unease. Surith continued, you will challenge me if you must, but you will do so publicly by proper form, and you will answer why 7 cycles passed without a sovereign while you grew fat on regency. Lady Veshra's eyes narrowed. Careful, Surith, we held this dominion together while you were absent. Did you? Surith asked softly. Or did you hold it down? Kotharin's gaze flicked to the guards along the edges of the hall. Kieran saw it, the subtle signal, the barely there tilt of his chin. A guard shifted. Kieran's instinct screamed. Assassination didn't require dramatic gestures. It required a moment where no one expected the blade. Kieran rose from his kneel in one smooth motion, stepping slightly to put himself between Surith and the nearest guard line. His hand dropped near his sidearm, though he knew drawing it would be madness in this room. Surith didn't look surprised. As if she'd expected betrayal to follow, ritual like thunder followed lightning. Kotharin lifted his voice. By right of the high houses, I invoke trial of sovereignty. Let the queen prove her claim. Murmurs, excited, anxious. A trial meant spectacle. It meant a legal excuse to do violence. Surith nodded once. Name the terms, Lady Veshra's voice purred. The terms are ancient. A sovereign must demonstrate dominion, command of law, command of loyalty, and command of force. Kieran felt his jaw tighten. Command of force. They wanted blood. Very well, Surith said. I accept. Kotharin smiled, and for the first time it looked like triumph. Then let the first test be loyalty. He extended an arm toward Kieran as if presenting a prize animal. Let your human vassal Prime prove his pledge, he said. Let him speak the vow before all. Kieran's stomach sank. The vow, if it was what he thought, wasn't symbolic, it was binding. It meant the Dominion could claim him as subject under their law, overriding human jurisdiction. It meant he could be imprisoned, conscripted, executed legally. Ambassador Rel took a half step forward, face pale with alarm. Kieran, he hissed, warning. Kieran didn't look back. He kept his eyes on Surith. She met his gaze, calm as ever. But in that calm he saw something else. A question, not will you do it, but are you willing to become what this requires? Because a queen without allies was just a woman on a platform, waiting to be devoured by polite predators. Kieran breathed in. He thought of human colonies burned on border worlds because the Dominion's regents had reallocated patrol fleets. He thought of the med tents filled with bodies because trade routes had been left unguarded. He thought of the countless briefings where humans had been told to show respect to nobles who treated lives like numbers. He thought of Surith's eyes when the nobles refused her, weariness, yes, but also resolve. And he thought of the throne's words Vassal Prime recognized it was already done. So Kieran stepped forward into the open again. He raised his chin so every drone could record his face, every noble could see he wasn't trembling whether or not it was true. He spoke slowly, choosing the words the way you chose footing on ice. I pledge, he said, to stand as witness to the sovereign's legitimacy. To uphold the covenant rings and the law of the throne against unlawful seizure. To answer summons when given by the sovereign in matters of dominion, stability, and protection of the realm. Kotharin's smile sharpened. And, Kieran let a beat pass, let the hall feel the tension. And he said, I pledge nothing that violates the lawful treaties between dominion and human worlds. Your law binds me in your hall, my law binds me in mine. If your challenge is honorable, my pledge stands. If your challenge is treason dressed in silk, my pledge becomes your problem. A hush fell. Lady Veshra's eyes flashed with offense. Kotharin's expression froze, then twisted because Kieran had done something the nobles hated almost as much as defiance. He'd forced clarity. Surith's voice came quiet but deadly. You hear him, the vow is given, the throne recognizes it. The projection above the dais shimmered again, vow recorded, Kotharin's jaw clenched. Very well, law and loyalty tested. He spread his arms slightly. Then the second test, force. The word hit like a drumbeat. Guards shifted again, more openly now. The crowd's murmur turned sharp, excitement, fear, appetite. Surith's gaze swept the hall. Name the challenge, Kotharin's eyes gleamed. A sovereign must defend the throne. Let an attacker be chosen, one of my champions. If you cannot stop him from reaching the throne, your claim is hollow. Kieran felt his muscles tighten. That wasn't a test. That was an attempted execution with legal garnish. Because if Surith struck too hard, she'd look like a tyrant. If she struck too softly, she'd lose. If she killed, they'd call her brutal. If she hesitated, they'd call her weak. And Kotharin would win either way, unless the force wasn't hers, unless it was human. Kieran's eyes flicked to the guard line again, tracing angles, distances. Surith's voice cut through his thoughts. Your champion will come armed. Of course, Kotharin said. As tradition allows, Surith nodded once. Then tradition also allows the sovereign to name her defender. Kotharin's smile returned, too confident. Name them. Surith turned and her eyes landed on Kieran. The hall inhaled as one. Kieran's heart did something unpleasant. Ambassador Rel's whisper was almost a groan. Oh, for Kieran stared at Surith, and in that stare he understood the trap and the counter-trap, the whole game layered beneath ritual. If Kieran defended her and won, the nobles would be forced to admit a human had upheld their sacred right better than they had. If he lost, she could still claim her own strength was never tested, only her defender. Either way, Kotharin's spectacle would not break her, it would expose him. Kieran exhaled, he nodded once. I stand, he said. Kotharin laughed softly. A human with a sidearm and soft bones, you insult our court. Kieran's eyes narrowed. Then pick someone who won't embarrass. A few nobles hissed. A few unexpectedly chuckled. Kotharin's crest flared with anger. He gestured sharply, and from behind the noble line stepped a figure clad in black lacquered armor, crested helm down, carrying a blade that hummed faintly with energy. A champion. The hall shifted to make space, the way crowds always did when violence became entertainment. Surith stepped back toward the dais, standing beside the throne, her posture composed as if she were watching a chess match she'd already anticipated. Kieran walked to the center of the open floor. The champion faced him motionless. A chime sounded again, a formal start. The champion lunged without warning, blade slicing the air with a hiss. Kieran moved, not gracefully, not heroically, efficiently. He pivoted, letting the blade pass where his ribs had been, and drove his elbow into the champion's forearm. The armor absorbed some of it, but the impact jolted the weapon's angle. Kieran followed with a kick aimed low, not at the torso, but the knee joint. The champion stumbled. Kieran's hand flashed to his belt, not for his gun, but for the compact shock baton he'd been allowed as non-lethal personal defense. He snapped it out, felt it hum to life. The champion recovered fast, swinging again, blade carving a line of shimmering light. Kieran ducked, felt heat skim his shoulder, and rolled sideways over the slick crystal floor. He came up on one knee, ironically mirroring his earlier kneel, then launched forward, baton up, not to strike but to jam the champion's wrist as the blade came down. Electricity crackled. The champion's arm spasmed. Kieran didn't hesitate. He slammed the baton into the helm's side and surged past, shoulder checking hard. The champion staggered, balance broken, and Kieran hooked a foot behind theirs and armor met crystal with a brutal crack, gasps erupted. Kieran planted his boot on the champion's blade hand and pressed, just enough to pin. He pointed the humming baton at the champion's throat. Yield, he said. The champion froze. There was a heartbeat of resistance. Then the helm dipped. Yield. A wave of sound rolled through the hall. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Catharin's face had tightened into something ugly. Surith's eyes, however, were calm. Kieran stepped back, lowering the baton. He kept his stance ready because a yielded champion didn't stop a desperate noble from ordering a second blade. Catharin's voice rose sharp. This is absurd. The throne's projection flared again. Defense successful. A pause, then a new line, colder than the first. Challenge continues. Law. The third test, the one Catharin couldn't win with blades because law required truth. And truth, Kieran suspected, was the one thing the nobles hadn't planned for. Surith stepped forward, her voice carrying like a bell. Your challenge invoked command of law, she said, so we will speak law. She turned her gaze to Catharin. Where was I held? She asked. Catharin's eyes narrowed. We do not know. Surith's smile was not kind. Do you not? She lifted her hand. A small object lay in her palm, no larger than a coin, dull metal inscribed with a faint emblem. Kieran recognized it immediately. Not because he'd seen it before, but because he'd read about it in human intelligence files. A regent seal, a marker used by Dominion officials when authorizing covert operations. Surith's voice cut deeper. Your regency ordered my disappearance. Your regency funded the mercenaries. Your regency sold border security to buy private fleets. The hall erupted into a roar of denial, accusation, and panic. Catharin stepped forward, face twisted. Lies. Surith's eyes remained steady. Then explain this seal. Explain why it was found in the cell where I was kept. Catharin's mouth opened, then snapped shut, because explanations were fragile things and the throne was listening. Surith turned slightly, addressing the hall. You refused to bow because you feared I would reclaim what you stole, she said. You feared judgment. You feared your own law. Lady Veshra's voice hissed. You have no proof. Surith lifted her other hand. A projection flickered not from the throne but from a small device Kieran hadn't noticed she carried. It unfolded in the air, footage grainy and dim of a narrow chamber, a woman chained, guards speaking in formal Dominion dialect, mentioning House Koth by name. Kieran felt a chill. She hadn't come here unarmed. Her weapon was evidence. Catharin lunged forward, rage boiling over. Seize her, seize the human. Guards moved. And this time they did not pretend it was ceremonial. Kieran's hand snapped to his sidearm. Ambassador Rel shouted something behind him, but it drowned under chaos. Then the throne spoke again, not with words, but with power. A shockwave of light rippled outward from the dais. Every guard halted as if pinned by invisible chains. Drones reoriented, lenses narrowing. The hall's luminous ribs brightened and the air filled with a hum that felt like law made physical. Treason indicated. The nobles froze. Catharin's face turned pale with sudden, desperate fear. Surith's voice, when it came, was quiet. House Koth, she said, you invoked law, the throne has answered. She looked down at Catharin like he was something unpleasant stuck to her boot. Kneel, she said. Catharin's mouth trembled, pride warred with survival. He did not kneel, so the throne made him. The floor beneath him flashed, a lattice of light forming around his feet, and with a force that looked gentle but felt absolute, his legs folded. He slammed down on both knees, hands splayed on crystal, crest shaking with humiliation. A stunned hush fell. All the nobles who had refused to bow stared at their leader on his knees. And then slowly, reluctantly, one by one, they began to kneel as well, not out of loyalty, out of fear. Because the throne had awakened and it remembered who it belonged to. Surith turned toward Kieran. For the first time since he'd stepped forward, her face softened, not into weakness, but into something like recognition of shared cost. You risked yourself for a law that is not yours, she said quietly. Kieran's mouth was dry, his heartbeat still hammered like a drum. I risked myself, he said, because I'm tired of watching powerful people hurt everyone and call it tradition. Surith's eyes held his. Then she did something that made the hall gasp again. She bowed her head to him, just slightly. A sovereign acknowledging a witness, not equal but seen. Then stand, she said, voice clear enough for the hall to hear, not as my possession but as my proof. Kieran swallowed, then nodded. He turned to face the nobles, who were still kneeling, their pride shattered into pieces that glittered like broken jewels. Surith's voice rose again, filling the hall with the calm certainty of someone who had survived cages and still returned upright. This dominion will not be ruled by hunger disguised as honor, she declared. It will be ruled by law, by duty, and by protection of the weak from the strong if necessary. Her gaze swept the room, landing on each noble like a verdict. And any who cannot bow to that, she said, may crawl. The throne hummed, the hall trembled, and in the middle of it all, Kieran Vale, human outsider, accidental vassal, stood beside the queen the nobles had rejected, realizing something with a strange mix of dread and clarity. He hadn't just knelt. He'd drawn a line. And the galaxy would have to decide which side of it wanted to live on. Surith stepped toward the throne, placed her hand upon it, and the light wrapped around her like a mantle. The projection above the dais flared one final time. Sovereign seated, Kieran didn't cheer, he didn't smile. He simply watched, shoulders squared, as the Dominion's oldest power recognized its rightful ruler. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing in that hall wasn't the throne. It was a queen who had been rejected, taken, chained, and had returned. And a human who had knelt first not because he was weak but because he was unafraid to show the universe what respect was supposed to mean. Outside the hall, the stars waited. Inside, the empire changed shape. And somewhere deep beneath all the ceremony, Kieran could almost hear the nobles' unspoken realization. They hadn't lost today because the queen was stronger. They'd lost because a human had reminded the throne what honor sounded like. And once the universe heard that sound again, it didn't forget.